Hello, and welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I'm your host, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your host, Jackson Keller.
And I have been hyping up this movie for several weeks now, if not publicly, then very privately, because we're finally getting to watch Bad Times at the El Royale. And
Bad Times in Fortnite Battle Royale.
I don't even know how to respond to that.
I really did not want to be the one to break the silence there. Just so you know, I've been preparing to cut you off with that since like before our pre-conversation. So I've been dying to let that one loose. So be grateful.
Oh my god. I need to hang up.
Well, I've succeeded in setting a new record for how quickly I can derail the conversation.
And how quickly you can break your co-host. Normally it takes the first anime reference. This time it's like the third word you fucking say. God damn it. What I was trying to say was that I've been very excited for this movie, and I am pleased to say that it, at least in my book, very much lives up to the hype. However, Jackson just ruined that for me.
Here I am, here to ruin the day, here to make everything worse. The harbinger of calamity and cringe. It's me, Jackson Keller. Bow to your new god.
Shut the fuck up and tell us what you thought about El Royale.
Sure thing. It was pretty good. It was very good, in fact. You know, I loved a lot of things about it. Had a lot going for it, and overall, it was a highly entertaining movie. But something, and maybe through the course of this conversation, I will determine what, but something kept me from being as, like, super hype as you are.
I totally understand why people maybe didn't like this movie as much as I did, because, as I said, and it might have just, like, I blasted through it, so it might have totally gotten lost, but this is probably my favorite movie of the year so far. I don't really see much coming out ahead of it that's going to dethrone it. But, like, I absolutely adored this movie, but I can also understand why other people absolutely hated it. So, like, as much as I love this movie, I don't think it is the best movie of the year, just my personal favorite.
Yeah, and so don't take me being kind of wishy-washy as a sign that I was lukewarm on it or that I didn't like it. I liked it quite a bit, and in fact, I would probably put it in probably my top 5 for the year, if only because I haven't seen that much this year that really super impressed me, and also all the stuff that probably was going to super impress me came out when I was out of the country. So, don't take me saying anything about this movie, any sort of criticism, any sort of, thought I have on it as an indication that you shouldn't go see it. You should. It's a great time. It's like 2.5 hours. It's a very long movie, but it feels much shorter than almost every 1 hour, 45-minute movie we talked about on this podcast. That should be indication enough that it's worth your time.
Yeah, this movie blasted by for me. But, like, as I was saying, though, I can totally understand why, and I guarantee there's going to be a subset of people who go to see this and leave absolutely hating it. Because there's definitely some story issues, or depending on how you want to look at it. I would argue that most of the story issues are intentional, with maybe one or two exceptions. And there's some theme issues, and like the theme issues are, I think, are what we're probably going to end up touching on the most in our discussion, just because they're relatively prevalent, and they're... I don't want to say too much because I feel like it kind of delves into spoilers a little bit on that. But just know that you might run into some issues there that could create some like cognitive dissonance leading to you disliking the movie. However, for me, the movie had just such an incredible aesthetic behind it, and they just did such an incredible work with the cinematography and editing and design that the plot, even with its issues, pulled me through it from scene to scene. I just wanted to see what they were going to do with the camera next, how they were going to set the whole thing up, what it was going to look like, and I was never disappointed from that standpoint. Like, I absolutely adored every scene. The opening scene has not left my mind in like 3 days. It was incredible. There's just so much to really love about this movie from a style standpoint that I can really overlook almost anything that you can throw at me with the story. I had a long discussion with previous guest Maddie, where we basically went through, and she liked it in a really good way as well, probably closer to Jackson's opinion on it than mine. And we basically went through and went, here's some thoughts as to what the issues are, and I ended that discussion going, okay, those are all valid. I don't care. I love this movie. So it's definitely the type of thing where I'm more than willing to overlook quite a few flaws on it just for everything that it does super well.
And with that, do we want to jump into spoilers?
Yeah, it's a little bit of an early one, but you know what? This movie, you should go in with as blind as you possibly can.
I was going to say, it's a thriller. Like, whether or not it's deconstructing or commentating on the thriller, you know, we can debate about that, but it's a thriller all the same. And as such, it's the kind of movie that you don't want spoiled for you, since the pleasures of being propelled through the plot are like half the fun. So
yeah, so we're going to definitely call the spoilers a little bit early on it, but like, there's good reason for it. Go watch this movie. Don't listen to us talk about it if you haven't seen it yet. Please. It's great. I love it. A lot. So yeah, let's kind of talk spoilers. And that's a tall order, though, at the same time, just because there's a lot to cover and not a super clear starting point on this one, just because with the way the movie works, it kind of plays around with time and order and cutaways and cutbacks. So it becomes kind of tricky to really pin down what's a great starting point for a conversation about death with this. Like, a ton of people die, but like, I don't even necessarily know that death order is the correct way to go with this one.
Well, you know what? Maybe not totally chronologically, but I think the opening scene that you had mentioned before would be a great place to start, because it is very effective and kind of distracting, but upon further reflection, I think in a good way that sort of sets the mood, sets the tone. So, yeah, in the beginning you have Nick Offerman, which is the distracting element, because I wasn't sure if it was him. And also, Nick Offerman's just one of those actors who's so distinct and so known for, like, a role, like he is Ron Swanson, that, like, it's difficult to not just see him that way. But I think with this sort of cameo here, the filmmakers knew that, because we got an extended sequence of him, tearing apart the hotel room, like pulling up the floorboards, like putting in this briefcase, presumably, well, I say presumably money because we find out that it's money, but like, something secret, regardless. And he puts it in the floor. And we get some waiting. He's waiting. And finally he opens the door. And as soon as he does, he is gunned down and, cut to title, I think. And what I like about the fact that it is Nick Offerman in hindsight, even though at the time I was like, oh, what the fuck? What's Ron Swanson doing here? Is the fact that he is such a known quantity, does make it more shocking and jarring, when it turns out that, like, he's not the protagonist, he's not our leading man, he's not even, like, a tertiary character. He's there to get killed and get the plot rolling, which is...
He gets maybe 4 lines in the movie later on.
Yeah. And I think that's, by using such a distinctive guy, I think that's setting us up to expect these sort of twists and turns, and to not take for granted that everyone will be safe necessarily.
Plus, I think it works really well, too, because Nick Offerman in this scene is very much in the dark, literally, not figuratively. The whole scene is set up kind of as a diorama-looking thing. Like, it looks like a shoebox diorama, and it's wonderfully shot. Like, this is the first shot that just fucking blew my mind. I adored watching this whole scene, because it was just wonderful. It was so good. And like later we get context for why it's set up that way, which is great too, because it suddenly solidifies Oh my god, the fucking cinematography in this movie is so good. That's not what I'm trying to talk about right now. I'm trying to talk about is the fact that it's dark, which kind of helps that idea of like, this could be Nick Offerman being like, I want to do something serious, but I don't necessarily want to be recognized as Ron Swanson type of deal, because later on he's in a mask too.
Yeah.
So like you can't really tell that it's him the entire time. So like this is not necessarily thematically related to the movie, but more just kind of a thing that I was thinking about, just in that like he was projected in such darkness or covered in a mask the entire time. I'm wondering if it's him trying to be like, hey, take me serious as an actor and not just as Ron Swanson, because he's genuinely a really good actor and he's also just a charming ass motherfucker. So
no, Nick Offerman is great. I definitely wasn't. I mean, I don't think that you're accusing me of that, but I definitely, to be clear, wasn't like dissing Nick Offerman by saying that his presence is kind of weird and jarring. But the other thing that you bring up with this scene, because I was thinking about this while I was watching the movie, but when I didn't know walking into it that it was directed by the same guy who did Cabin in the Woods, which maybe explains a lot. Because I remember ever since, like I took my freshman film classes and we talked about Rear Window, one of the images that I tend to hone in on are like screens and windows, because usually if that's a prominent element in a movie, then these issues of like spectatorship and voyeurism are obviously going to be relevant to filmmaking, as we are sitting and watching through a window. And so I like that the movie subtly tips us off in this diorama scene where Ron Swanson approaches the camera and like adjusts his tie or whatever he ends up doing when he's facing, what we later learn to be the mirror, but is actually like a one-sided window, so the people in the hotel rooms can be observed. And so, yeah, I might not have been giving this element that as much credit as I perhaps should have, again, just because I didn't have the context of who the director was and what his interests are when it comes to filmmaking. But I think this makes it it's really interesting then when later on we get the first major death in the like plot line with the FBI agent getting shot by the older sister, the runaway, and that screen sort of breaks and the fourth wall literally collapses. And that was just an element that like I had thought about at the time but hadn't really put into the broader context of like a theme, because that was one of my problems with the movies, that thematically I didn't feel like it really came together. But that that choice was certainly like intentional. It was certainly a very important choice to frame it this way, and again like have a literal camera be behind the action. So I mean, I guess it might just be another way of underscoring like to not expect the traditional rules of thrillers to really apply, because that's kind of what we get with the FBI agent's death, is that it's a classic sort of bait and switch decoy protagonist syndrome. Because and after this opening scene, when we get our established characters, we get Jeff Bridges' character, who goes by Father Flynn in this. We get Darlene, the singer, and then we have John Hamm as this like grandstanding kind of racist, sexist, like 60s vacuum salesman. And then when we find out that he's like the FBI agent, it's interesting how our sympathies end up immediately like sort of shifting. Like we understand that like he was playing sort of an act, and John Hamm acts like very soft spoken, like he's talking to like his wife and kids and being very sweet while he's doing all this stuff. And so it seems like because he's the one investigating, and this, we go in understanding that this is a thriller that perhaps will be following John Hamm, like he's going to be our lead all along. It's not going to be one of the other characters, only for him. And it seems to, this also adds to the fact that the reason he gets killed is that he ignores orders to go like do the right thing and try and save this girl that he finds out has been like bound and gagged, and he's going to try and help, and that ends up leading to his death and the fourth wall, the window shattering with the shotgun blast. But of course, we find out that him releasing the little girl wasn't a good thing. It made a total mess of things. Like, everything later that happened in this shit show is like kind of a result of that action. And
not kind of.
Well, definitely not kind of. Very much a result of that action. So maybe that's I mean, that's a nice image for we're not following the noir tropes to a T necessarily, the literal shattering of the television movie screen.
Yeah, let me just really quick contextualize who the director of this movie is, because it does tell a lot about what you should expect from this movie. Because if you are familiar with Cabin in the Woods, he's the guy who made it. His name is Drew Goddard. He did the original Cabin in the Woods. He's the writer and director on that. So, like, very much that subversion of expectations, a deconstruction of the narrative and meta commentary therein. He's also done Cloverfield. He was the writer on that, which, you know, is very much a monster movie, but more about the human side of things. So it's also a movie where you, like, don't necessarily focus on the broader pictures. Like, yeah, this big thing is happening there, but it's not so much about that. Like, that's more of a set piece. It's an element to it to inform the rest of the story. So, like, as we kind of dive into, like, things that don't necessarily work or might be a little bit of a disconnect to viewers, such as John Hamm's death, which kind of comes out of the blue and works both as a subversion a la Cabin in the Woods, as well as a don't focus too much on this. It's a moment that informs the rest of the plot more than a, you know, definitive beat that comes out of things like Cloverfield. So Drew Goddard, I just adore, apparently. I'm looking through his IMDb page as I'm reading this right now and realizing how much he's done, including he actually directed the pilot of The Good Place. So
I did see that, I think. Yeah. No, when I was looking at his IMDb page too for that context, I noted, I'm like, oh wow, he directed like all of Sean's favorite things.
Yeah, actually, kind of going through here. Yeah, he's done quite a bit of things that I rather enjoy. So, but yeah, no, I think the context of the director really helps inform a lot of the movie, as I was saying, just because what he does is always so very distinct, and it's much more subversion and takedowns than genuine, like, homages in a way. It's definitely referential and done in reverence of the source material, but also very much in the face of the source material.
Maybe now then, with all that context established, I'll be revealing myself as, like, film illiterate, like a dummy, because I and my other friend that I had seen this with were talking a little bit about it after the movie, and I had mentioned that it had kind of a Tarantino, like, Coen Brothers sort of feel, and, you know, especially with, like, the nonlinear chronology and the use of title cards, kind of like Pulp Fiction, and my friend had said he had sort of summed up the thought that I had by saying that, well, yeah, the difference between this movie and like a Tarantino or a Coen Brothers flick, though, is that those movies by those directors tend to like use these trappings of homage and genre to say something and tell a story with a little bit more substance, whereas this one was just taking a like well-trodden like genre and telling the story in a really stylish, really effective way, which at the time when we were talking about it, I completely agreed with that assessment. And now I'm thinking about it, though, especially with all this like information about the director that I didn't have at the time. Now I'm not so sure. So Sean, let me ask you this, since you are very into this movie. So if it's a deconstruction, what exactly is the movie deconstructing, or what the ultimate thematic point is? Because that's sort of where the movie, it didn't lose me, but it didn't quite grab me, like, towards the end. I don't think that, like, plot-wise, it came together in, like, a satisfying climax and all that, but thematically, I don't think it had quite the same effect. Whereas, like, I haven't seen Cabin in the Woods, but I have seen the Bob Vids takedown of the CinemaSins Cabin in the Woods. So I got a pretty good idea what that movie's about. And it seems like in Cabin in the Woods, there's like very much a big like turning point where like they kind of beat you over the head with what the commentary is. And like thinking about it, I can see the like framing of the screens. I could see that like playing with the fourth wall, with like not knowing who our lead might be, with where our sympathies might lie. But it feels like a lot of those subversions of expectation are more about plot and less about theme in this one. But I would be happy to know if I'm wrong.
So I actually agree with you in a lot of regards. A lot of my kind of thoughts on how the theme and deconstruction works comes from reading other critics, just based on, you know, what their interpretation of it was, because I actually agree in a lot of ways that the theme kind of falls short on this one. I think the deconstruction elements work really well for the plot, and I want to kind of jump back to that in a minute. But I think as far as just basic thematic deconstruction, like clearly the idea of it is with the El Royale, it's a two-sided hotel. Half of it is in Nevada, half of it is in California, and like that duality of man is just constantly throughout the movie. It's all about like two sides, and is anybody truly good or is anybody truly evil? And Chris Hemsworth's Billy Lee has a whole spiel about that in one of his cult things going on, and it's there. The idea is there. Whether it sticks the landing is another question, because I'm kind of hesitant to be like, yeah, it thematically works, because it doesn't. It just kind of... The theme is there, and that's all it is. Like, I'm trying to come up with a better way of putting it, but I don't know that there really is, because the theme just kind of... It's very clear what they wanted to say, but it never really comes together in a concrete, punchy way that makes you really understand what they're going for. And so I entirely understand the critiques that, like, while Tarantino movies have some overarching theme in some regard, or like they're trying to say something, it feels like this movie isn't, because the theme is not really explicitly stated or really even explicitly shown. However, I feel like what you were saying with, like, breaking the fourth wall and playing with expectations and whatnot is more the deconstruction of the genre than the actual theme. And like, this is something that, as you were saying it, I was kind of piecing it together, because it's not so much about the theme of, you know, no one is beyond redemption, as much as it is the deconstruction of the genre, the recognition that we are watching people be terrible to each other, that we are, like, there is no true hero in this story because everyone has a darker past to them. The redemption arc is kind of a thing that you kind of grasp at straws with. It's there, but it's not really tangible. However, the idea that no one there is actually good, and they all have those skeletons in their closet, and, you know, even those who you end up rooting for might be terrible monsters, and the fact that you have done so in previous movies is really underscored through more of a technical side of things, with the voyeuristic elements to it, and the, you know, fourth wall breaking, changing your protagonist at the last minute because, you know, the one guy who seemed like he might be genuinely good ends up being terrible. And like, even the genuinely good guy, the more you think about it, has clearly some ulterior motives going on here, given the videotape that he probably was after. So like, I think it's more of a technical teardown than an actual thematic teardown, if that makes sense.
Okay, well, I'm relieved to hear that I might not be a total doofus then. So the thing that I was saying upon first exiting the theater, which upon reflection isn't quite accurate, is that I had sort of lumped it in with Baby Driver, which was also a very stylish sort of crime film, and I had said that kind of like Baby Driver, it was style over substance. And I think upon further reflection, there is substance here, but like you're saying, it's just maybe muddled or maybe too focused on the plot, and there are themes, but they aren't super cohesive or expressed super clearly, despite the very obvious symbolism of like the line and stuff. But because I think with those last scenes, there were a lot of moments that for both me and the people I was watching it with, like, were very striking. And they really, as moments, they sort of have like a pretty cogent like theme or purpose to them, but like taken all together, I'm not sure how much it really adds up to. And so the two I'm really thinking of, the first is when Darlene is confronted with Chris Hemsworth character, who's basically a like Charles Manson-esque like cult leader, like suckers in like young women and prepubescent girls, kind of abuse them and like get them to follow him and devote themselves to him, and that's why the older sister.
Just a quick aside, because like this is something I was trying to figure out. How old do you think Rosie was?
I'd say anywhere between 12 and 15.
Okay.
No older than 16, I would probably say.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I couldn't really tell, because there were moments where she felt older and like just kind of emotionally stunted, given that, she had a history of abuse. And this is not to belittle those who have survived abuse or anything like that, more just a, lingering after effects thereof type of issue.
Yeah.
And so, like, I was kind of wondering if she might have been actually older, because there were moments, and this might just be because of the actress who played her, despite playing her wonderfully, did not always look super young.
No, well, it's weird, because in some shots she did, in some shots she didn't. In some lines, it seemed like she was delivering them really young, and others she didn't. So I think it's kind of ambiguous, but I think we are to understand that, like, she is.
I mean, that plays into the movie too, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, it does. But I think we can generally understand that, like, she's young and impressionable, and it's creepy that Chris Hemsworth is doing this regardless of how young. Like, the movie.
Yeah, no, he's a terrible character.
Yeah,
like Billy Lee's fucking awful.
Yeah. And so what makes this scene great, where Darlene confronts him about this, and like he starts to talk about his philosophy. He gives a little bit of a villain speech, and we see it earlier in the movie too, in the flashback, where he's talking about how there is no good and evil, and only like what the authority wants you to do, and like picking a side. And Darlene just gets this great moment because of kind of her history of like being taken advantage of, where she just sees right through him and is like, okay, look, like, cut the bullshit. I'm shutting you down right now. Like, you're not a charismatic, like, god great thinker. You're just another abusive fuckhead who wants to get his dick wet. And he even tries to continue his monologue, and she just doesn't have it. She's like, no, you're not talking. And it's such...
It is... like the best fucking scene in the movie from a character standpoint, undeniably.
Yeah, totally. And her character's great, and I love the interactions that she has with Jeff Bridges and the uneasy sort of alliance they have to strike up, because Jeff Bridges tries to drug her earlier in the movie, and like on a bad feeling she like brains him with a bottle, and then they have to like work together once the like shotgun starts firing, and just it's a nice like set of moving pieces and like character motivations, and the way that relationship develops is interesting and pretty damn good. But to sort of get back to like what the theme, like the issue of themes, like that moment was a real like like head nod, like yeah, like that's saying some real ass shit right there. And then so as far as how these ideas of like morality and what side you're on, and like nobody being really good or evil, I mean, okay, so then I guess to put this into full context, then there's the other scene which people that I was with, specifically Haley, really responded to, and it was the scene where Miles, the like mild-mannered, sort of timid hotel concierge,
heroin addicted,
I might add, but he ends up kind of saving the day when he pulls out his hitherto unknown sniping skills, because we assume that he's just sort of this like nobody kid who got involved in some bad shit throughout most of the movie and is just too weak to like get out of it. But like then we see randomly when he's presented the opportunity to pick up a gun, like a just total flashback of him being this crack shot and standing among this like field of bodies in Vietnam. And it's a really
a declaration that he's killed 123 men.
Yeah, that's what brings the flashback about. And so that it's so jarring, and it's a really bold move for them to reveal the information this way, but I think it really pays off. I think it really works for him. And so then, he kind of saves the day with his gun skills, and kind of creates an opening for them to fight back against Billy Lee and his cronies. And then he ends up getting stabbed by Rosie, and I think Jeff Bridges shoots her, right?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So somebody kills Rosie, and so then throughout the whole movie, he's been all the people he's killed in Vietnam have weighed on him so heavily, and the fact that he thinks that Jeff Bridges is actually a priest when he's just like a con man is a big part of his character. He wants to confess. He wants to like take a load off on his sins. And even though he's not a real priest, he hears out the confession that Miles has anyway, and then Miles dies right on the borderline between Nevada and Texas. So, who can say who is really good, who can say who is really evil? Yes.
Nevada and California.
Why did I say Texas? Nevada and California, thank you. Yeah. So I like the scene. I like the scene a lot. I think that maybe this is just me as an amateur ass writer. But something about that idea of like the fake thing being as good as the real thing, and whether or not that's true, like that's always a theme that gets to me. And so with Jeff Bridges here, not being a real priest but serving that role anyway, well, is he just as good? Sort of that lingering question. I like that. But the problem I sort of have with this sort of breakdown, with this blurring of the lines between like who is good, who is bad, who gets redeeming qualities and who doesn't, is that like kind of the elephant in the room is that, unless I'm forgetting about something, Billy Lee doesn't really have any redeeming qualities.
Hang on.
Oh?
So you were talking about how, like, the theme and the kind of idea is not necessarily, like the landing doesn't stick on it. And it totally does not on the idea of, like, duality and all that good shit. And, like, we've covered that just does not land. But, like, we've also kind of covered that this is a deconstruction of standard tropes and ideas. And, like, admittedly, this is where kind of some of my weakness in filmmaking goes. I think I've seen one Tarantino movie, which is From Dusk Till Dawn, which is not, like, Pulp Fiction.
Not the canon, so to speak.
No, and I will say I really like From Dusk Till Dawn, but it's not his best movie. So I'm kind of speaking out my ass here, so correct me if I'm ever wrong here. But, like, the idea of duality and, like, the everyone is redeemable, or, some people are beyond redemption, yada yada, all that bullshit feels very basic and on the level, right? Like, that feels like a type of thing that any one of Tarantino's movies could have made, or anything like that. Like, something that isn't trying to subvert expectations would have made.
That's kind of the problem, is that Tarantino, in general, Tarantino gets you to eat your greens through sort of the genre pop style. So especially in his later films, like there's, you can find like a ton of undergraduate writing about like Pulp Fiction, I'm sure, but just going off of the more recent examples like Django, Hateful Eight, Inglourious Bastards, they're all kind of revenge movies, but they use the trapping of the revenge movie. And I come to think of it, like Hateful Eight's a pretty similar movie in a lot of ways. But the thing about those movies is that they're using these trappings to make some sort of deeply political statement, which again is more obvious in his new films because, he's talking about slavery and racism and, using the Western as sort of a vehicle to do that. And Inglourious Bastards, there's been an argument that it's all about like the power of cinema and the power of storytelling, and that's what it's actually about, and not taking down the Nazis. So, I mean, I think you have an argument with like that being a basic sort of thing as far as like this genre goes, but I don't know. I'm not sure if Tarantino is a great example.
Then ignore Tarantino. Like, let's throw that one out. But like, just kind of like the idea of this being like a staple of a genre type of deal, where like, the lovable rogue and the people who you wouldn't normally trust, but you're quick to gain to be like, yeah, let's fucking. These guys rock. They're terrible people, but they're redeemed through their actions within this movie. And, like, here's the duality. They have both sides. Yeah! Check out the themes and stuff like that. Like, I feel like that's the type of thing that's super prevalent. Like, even, like, Baby Driver and shit like that.
Yes.
Because, like, Ansel Elgort's Baby is exactly that. He's doing terrible things, but it's for a good cause and all that good shit. But, like, so here's my question for you then. Isn't that playing into the themes of the deconstruction of the mythos? Because especially, like, if it doesn't stick the landing on that theme, and this is, like, meta on meta, so, like, this is also, when you get to that point, you are basically talking out of your ass to defend something. So, once again, I'm well aware of what I am saying in this moment. But I have to make the point because I think it's an interesting idea that maybe the fact that the theme doesn't really stick and like kind of disagrees with itself just through its character acting is part of the deconstruction of the genre. Because, as you were saying, Chris Hemsworth, Billy Lee is very much on like the morally gray, fuck the good and bad argument, you make your own path, be who you want to be, and then he's just a dick. There's nothing redeeming about him. So, like, it plays into that narrative very well, and so an indication of where the theme doesn't stick right off the bat. So, if it's a meta deconstruction of that, wouldn't it make sense that the villain, in essence, wouldn't fall into it itself? Because, like, it's playing with the idea of these genres a lot of times have these ideas that like the lovable rogue is redeemable, but the villain is still not for some inexplicable reason despite outwardly stating the theme.
That might be. That I'm willing to accept that as an argument. I think that's a very fair point.
It's kind of talking on your ass at the same time.
I don't have much of a counter argument for that. Just beyond that. For me, because you're right that it is always spicy to lean on the, it was intended to be bad sort of argument. But for me, sort of my gut feeling on cases where that does apply to a movie is, well, after hearing the argument, do I appreciate the theme and the intent more, or am I still left kind of underwhelmed? And this time I'm in the, latter category. Like that doesn't move the needle so much on my thoughts on like the movie or the themes, or it still just doesn't feel like super duper cohesive.
Oh, I mean, it doesn't necessarily for me either, I should say. Like it once again, my driving on this movie is much more of the stylistic and cinematography elements to it rather than the actual like, hey, this is thematically wonderful type of deal. So it's hard to say, I guess. Like, as much as proud of that moment as I was, it still is thematically a mess.
Well, that's fair enough. Yeah. I don't know. The movie, it has themes, which is good. I like when movies have themes and you can identify them. But yeah, that's it's just like the one thing holding me back from like putting this on par with like how I feel about like the better Tarantinos, that keeps me from being really super like, yeah, like fuck yeah, Bad Times at the El Royale versus like, oh yeah, that was a very, very good movie. One other thing that I wanted to address though, while I'm on the subject of these two scenes, because they're my favorite parts, and it's not a theme per se. I guess it's kind of a theme, but more of a motif. I really like how 60s this movie is, And I like not only the aesthetics of like the 60s in film and like how it lends itself to like noir, and you can do like cool looking classic cars and classic rock and hippies and all those great like iconography that makes for good cinema. But I really like how it's the whole purpose of the movie as shown through kind of like this corny, like old fashioned sort of shady motel, is that it's like the seedy underbelly of the 60s, like how all those trappings that I just said were really actually like sort of violent and disruptive. Like, you know, people singing, the music scene, we see that with Darlene, like that's a violent, unfair, cruel underbelly like scene. The Vietnam War, you know, that's kind of hanging there in the background. We see Nixon talking about pulling out on the TV screen, and then that comes back later as like a truly like brutal, horrifying, traumatic element that we think of as like a big hallmark of the 60s as an era. And just you know, the political situation with you know, what's presumably Kennedy on that tape, with the FBI like trying to cover it up and all that stuff. Yeah, and really like the thing that Billy Lee himself was what made this theme like stick out to me, just because you hear all the stories about like the communes and like the free love sort of movement and all the like hippie stuff happening in the 60s, having also again this dark underbelly when you have cult leaders like Charles Manson and, you know, Billy Lee in this case, using that to you know, abuse people and do horrible things. So I like that was probably the most like resonant theme to me, or like the most resonant motif, is like the grimy underbelly of the 60s. And that's the kind of motif I like, because then it's the best of both worlds, because I still get to indulge in like the aesthetic stuff that I like to indulge in, but then it also has a point. So it's just great.
Yeah. As I said, while Jackson kind of is held back by the lack of theme and whatnot, this movie just rocked my fucking world, and I goddamn adored it. So, I don't know. I mean, I guess, with the exception of me gushing about cinematography for another 45 minutes, I don't know that I really have much else to add.
I think I'm pretty much tapped out. I mean, if you want to gush about the cinematography for at least a bit,
I mean,
then, you know, go right ahead.
I've talked about the diorama scene, which is kind of my big one. There's a couple other scenes that I think are really cool. I really liked John Hamm's slow walk through the back ways as he's kind of exploring all of the underbellies of the quote-unquote pervert hotel. I think that's really interesting to watch, and it's very slow, very plotting, and it's great. I want to say the opening shot of the actual hotel when it's not Nick Offerman is just a single long shot, and it's fucking incredible, because it follows Darlene from basically the moment she pulls in to the time that she walks into the front door, including unpacking all that good stuff. It's great. It's wonderful, and I'm like 98% sure it's a single long shot, and if you could pull off a long shot in your movie, I basically put that above 50% of the movies that come out that year, even if the rest of your movie is trash. So, put more long shots in movies.
I'm team put more long shots in movies. I appreciate that. Like my favorite film, Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith.
Is there a long shot in that one? I don't remember.
The opening, space battle. It's not. You can't really call it a long shot because it's all computer animated. But that was the intent.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Whatever you say. Whatever you say. No, I don't remember anything about Star Wars Episode 3. I'm not gonna lie to you. I don't fucking know. This is trailed into the middle of nowhere. Let's just fucking wrap this shit up. Go watch this movie. It's great. I can't talk about the cinematography well enough. I need to watch it again. It's 2.5 hours long, and there's so many moments of it that are so fucking good. Go watch it.
Highly recommended. Although, you know, hopefully if you hadn't seen it yet, you didn't listen to the spoilers, because this is a movie where spoilers are bad.
Yeah, it's a big deal. My usual audio tester, Sam, I'm not going to have her listen to this episode before it goes live. So if there's any issues, please let me know. But she did not watch it with me, and I do not want to spoil her on this one because it's a great movie. So I've been Sean McKinda. Follow me on Twitter, Sean_McKinda. Find my website, isortof.com. It's got my link to Twitch streaming and all that good stuff there, so go check that out if you're bored on a Wednesday, Thursday, or Sunday. You know, I do a bunch of stuff. Speed running, if that's interesting to you. It's surprisingly weird to watch streaming because it's a lot of me just grinding bosses for a while. But I'll talk about the game, so if you want to know what I'm running, come check that out.
And I'm Jackson Keller. You can theoretically find me over on Twitter at Jackson J. Keller, but the account's kind of a ghost of its former self, which is fine by me. But, if you want to send feedback, that's the best place I got for you for now. I'll get on finding an alternate way if people want to get in touch with me directly, like I think we said like an Ask FM last week. That'd be good. That'd be good because I hate Twitter.
And you could probably find a way to link that to your Twitter or something like that so that your answers automatically tweet out there.
Oh, you totally can.
And that'd be great. That way you don't even have to fucking look at Twitter. You can just answer the questions there and everybody else gets to see them.
What a delightful world we live in, where there's means where I can have a Twitter presence without having to look at that fucking horrible hell site.
Yeah. Speaking of that horrible hellscape, you can follow the podcast on Twitter at BADH_cast, where I tweet out an assortment of things from it, just kind of keep you updated on what's coming up next, anything that might be going on, any sort of special events, guests, all that good stuff, so go check that out. As always, thanks to Loads of the Highway for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide, alternate take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. And shoutouts to 25yearslatersite.com for hosting us on their site. This is actually, I feel like, a cogent episode that is worthy of actually going up there, given that we talk about theme and don't just immediately derail. We do immediately derail.
The editing gods over at 25 Years Later, they're gonna click the play button on this and be like, oh wow, they're talking about a real film this week. Yes, let's see what they have for us. And then they'll hear me say that fucking Fortnite thing.
And then the 45 minutes of unedited silence.
And they'll just close it. They'll never listen to us again.
And yeah, next week we're going to be talking about The Hate You Give. That Hate You Give? I'm not sure.
The Hate
You Give, which is a request from Jackson because he's read the book and says it's very good, and the movie looks like it will be thematically relevant to the podcast. Although, as two white dudes, it'll be interesting to talk about.
Yeah, that book is great, and I've read that book, and you should read it too if you haven't. If you are interested at all in seeing that movie, it's like the realest ass YA book I've ever read. So if your normal problem with YA is that it's all like fantasy dystopias and like silly romantic plots, well, here's a YA book about a real dystopia called The United States of America.
Oh, positivity.
Bye.
Don't you go